Welcome to the Your Message Received podcast. And now, taking your message to the finish line, your host, John Duffin.
Hey folks, John Duffin here with Duffin Media. Welcome back to another episode of Your Message Received. Your Message Received is the home, the place, the platform to help you find your best, most true, authentic business voice. Heck, maybe it's your most authentic voice. Get what you want, find what you need, improve your results, make billions of dollars, get 1 million personal records. I don't know that we're going to guarantee those last two, but we're on our way to that. And the reason we've been able to keep rolling forward as you continue to like, watch, subscribe, share is because we keep bringing people on who walk the walk. Today, absolutely no exception to that rule. We've got Matt Taylor with us today too. Powerlifting coach, fitness advisor, and one heck of a story that goes with it too. Matt, thanks for showing up for me today. It's great to have you.
Thanks. Pleasure to be on today, John.
So you specialize in fitness, you specialize in lifting, and you specialize in terms of helping people to be able to do that as a fitness and lifting instructor. Walk me through the beginning. What got you so interested in doing that?
Good question. So specifically within lifting, I specialize in powerlifting, which is the squat, the bench, and the deadlift. And whether you're doing that just to use them as your pillars with getting really strong in like a full body. We can get into the metaphysical side of it later, but at a physical level, getting really strong. But you can also do it as a sport. And what's interesting to me is just how much somebody's like basic fitness routine, if you will, might align with the actual sport itself. What initially got me into the sport of powerlifting was entirely on accident, to be honest with you. I lifetime non-athlete, tried all the sports because my parents put me in everything for one season growing up and never got the ball, always got picked last. I was that guy.
Right? That was me.
There we go. Yeah. And so I just was never really in love with it. And I think the appeal with powerlifting for me was that I fell into lifting basically on accident after I started lifting because I was mad at somebody. And I was like, I'm just going to show them how jacked I can get. If I lift weights, I'll get huge. And then like they can't, I'll have the biggest bench press in the room. They can't deny me, right? And hated lifting for physique. I found out after about 2 weeks, but loved the quantifiable nature of powerlifting. I was like, oh, I can do 5 more pounds than last time. Okay, plus 5. Cool. And if a week later, there's another 5 and so on. You can sort of keep building. And then you can almost treat this like this big troubleshooting project of, okay, well, I've started going from plus 5 to plus 2. Why did that slow down? How do I adjust? And it was this really cool project where I didn't have to wait for anybody to pass me the ball. It turned out I was actually okay at doing something. Like I could see progression, which I never found with other sports, that there was that quantifiable thing that really drew me in and built that interest. And then from there, initially my goal wasn't really to be competitive. I signed up for fun. It sounded cool. But then the first time I signed up personally to compete, I noticed this shift in just my mental energy around working out, where I was enjoying it. I was showing up pretty consistently, but suddenly, in 3 weeks, I had this thing. I had to show up. I couldn't change that, Sunday, February, whatever it was.
Right.
That was when I had to be ready. And it was like, oh, okay, cool. And suddenly everything intensified that little bit more. And it was like, if you want to draw, this was as a teenager, but in adult analogies, you've got your project deadline. You don't get to change it. You have to do what you need to do to get that project done. I had to do what I need to do to show up as strong as possible. And that's basically how I got started. Entirely on accident, signed up a couple of weeks before the competition, fell in love with the sport after having one of the worst competitions of my life. And just sort of kept signing up for meets and finding, okay, well, last competition I did this, level up a little for the next one, qualified for provincials, to nationals, to worlds. And, there was that stepping ladder of just progression, which again, I'd never really had. And in that same year I did worlds, I started coaching because I thought, okay, this feels like a good qualification level to be at for this. Let's see if I can help some other people find the same thing.
So, as you say, you start, if I heard you correctly, and by the way, in reading your bio and what have you, you weren't the typical cliched muscle hound that when you began the process. Did I read correctly that you would call yourself, you were 99 pounds?
Yeah, so I'm 5'8", 5'9",
Hmm.
depends if end of the day or start of the day, right?
Well, listen,
And
because I'm getting older, I feel like the number that metric's regressing in terms of my even my height. So, but yeah, so you weren't the typical cliched what I would picture if you walked in the gym and saw some big muscular, powerlifting. And also, you said you started because you were mad at somebody. Do you remember
yes.
the fight?
It wasn't really a fight. I got talked at. Yeah, so I was in gym class and I had been like, I think my parents got an elliptical trainer that they put in the basement or
Oh,
something like
right.
that.
Okay, sure.
And I was really enjoying the numbers thing.
Hmm.
This is a common theme you'll see with basically everything in my life.
Got
If I
it.
can quantify it and measure
Hmm.
improvement,
Hmm.
I'm in, right?
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like I'll just do the elliptical for 20 minutes or whatever after school. And I did it on resistance 8 and then I did it on resistance 9 and whatever,
Hey.
right? And in my head, I'm doing this like progression thing. I'm really enjoying things. I'm
Hmm.
seeing this number go up. It's like gamified to me. It was really fun. We're doing wind sprints or suicides or whatever they're called, where
Hmm.
it's like the beep test, basically.
Okay.
That's what it was. It was the beep test in gym
Hmm.
class. And I'm only a few weeks into doing this elliptical thing. But gym teacher pulls me aside after I tap out pretty early because I'm not great at sports stuff at this point. He's, hey, Matt, you're clearly not in the best shape of your life. And there, whatever. He kept talking. I stopped
Hmm.
listening. I was just mad. I'm like, why? How is this supposed to help me here? You're not giving me any advice. You're just
In
telling
any
me I'm not
way.
good. Yeah.
Um,
I still don't like the guy, but that's a separate issue. 20 years later, whatever it is now.
oh,
Um,
no grudge there.
no,
Um,
nothing. And
but
so I literally just went home that day and Googled, how to get jacked, gain muscle,
mhm.
bodybuilding, whatever it was.
So what was it like in the beginning? You say you were naturally, like you felt like you had a natural propensity, but was there any ramp up time or did you notice like right away? It's like, oh, wait a minute, I can start to do this.
Oh, there was no propensity. No, I started lifting and I was really weak.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It didn't like
Yeah.
it that sound the way you described it sounded like a rather fast accelerator. So what were like so you start out and listen, I'm no guru with it at all. So that's what I was going to say. So you do. What was the part that you think? Because you're mad at being talked at,
Sure.
but often that doesn't stay. What kept you coming back? You talk about the metrics and the metrics. Were the metrics there for you fast enough to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to stick around? Or was it the anger part that had you sticking around at the beginning?
I don't think the anger lasted more than like 48 hours or so.
Right,
As much as
right.
there's, this 20-year grudge, it's
Mhm.
not hot and fiery
No, I
like
hope
that.
not.
My whole life defined around a gym teacher
Right.
conversation.
Yeah, I wasn't looking to fan those flames, but
No.
right.
But yeah, in terms of what kept me in, I think there was a couple things.
Hmm.
So my dad was serial entrepreneur, or
Okay.
was, however you want to put it.
Hmm.
Um, and he lifted a lot as when he was younger and stuff. He
Got
hadn't
it.
lifted in a
Got
long
it.
time. And
Hmm.
basically, I'd expressed this interest in going to the gym, and he jumped
Hmm.
all over it. He was
Great.
like, "Hey, let's go to the YMCA. We've
Hmm.
got some memberships. Let's rock and roll. Let's
Hmm.
go. I'll show you the weights and whatever, right?" And classic old school mindset. But one of the best things he taught me was like, you got to focus on the form first. And this
Okay.
isn't news, right? But
No,
as
right,
a
but
12,
always a good
13-year-old kid,
reminder.
you're going to go load up the stack and kill yourself on a bench press, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, basically just start with the form and
Hmm.
build from there, but make sure you've got the form because everything relies on that.
Hmm.
And I think initially what kept me in is it was just something I was doing with my dad. We didn't really have any things that we did together, and this became
Hmm.
a thing that we could do
Hmm.
together. And it was just pretty fun that way. In that we'd go to the gym together. I like right from day one, I basically had a gym buddy. I had that accountability where he
Hmm.
said, all right, let's go. Like I'm done work for the day, or I've taken time on my lunch break or whatever it may be. Let's go. And he made that time for me to do that. And I think that's part of what kept me in initially. And then seeing the numbers start to come in as we did that kind of pulled me in further.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe a few weeks, yeah, so that would have been maybe 3, 4 weeks in, where I was like, I don't really care about the physique thing. Like, I feel like I've got a good pump. I'm trying to get my
Mm-hmm.
diet to line up with this, but the
Yep.
numbers are super fun to me, and that drew me in
Mm-hmm.
really hard. And then fast forward another maybe 1 or 2 years later, and I found
Right.
out, oh, kind of like I was talking about earlier, there's this sport that's basically the exact same thing that I've been doing and seeing success with.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at these records on the website and like, I don't know, maybe I'm not that far off right now. I could build towards, and some of it's that naive delusion of like, how hard could it be? Right. I
Well,
started a
right.
business for the same
Right.
reason. Right. Like if I don't have to work for this person, how much harder could it really be to just like file my own taxes and take a bigger piece of the pie?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
so
Because
fun.
that's totally how that works. Yeah. It's so simple. But that like naive delusion is kind of what drew me in. And then, by
Right.
the time you're in it and you're like, you've got to do all this work and all these other
Mhm.
things, well, you're already in it. So, sunken cost and let's go.
Yeah. So for that, when I think it, so then you're going on this ascent and the numbers and the metrics are starting to compound and all that sort of thing. And what's it like as you're ascending? And for example, like you're going into now, and it was deadlifting, I'm thinking, if I remember correctly, right? That it was like where you're going upwards and upwards and upwards in terms of really big numbers. What was that feeling like for you?
I can't say I've ever had a PR that felt like a personal record that felt better or worse than another one.
Hmm.
That feeling of like unlocking the next level,
Yeah,
even if it's literally 1 pound,
yeah.
which can feel insane when you're like, well, I went from 500 to 501 or something
Hmm.
ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
0.2% or whatever it works, or zero
Hmm.
point 0.4, whatever it is, a decimal of a percentage point, right? Um, it always just feels like, all right, cool, I did the right thing.
Hmm.
I've checked all the boxes, I've paid my dues, I've earned the right to get to this point because there's no real cheat code, right? I
Hmm.
can't just load the weight and game it somehow where I, fast track or cut a corner and suddenly I'm there. The weight
Right.
is the weight. There's no
Hmm.
changing it.
Yep.
And I remember asking one of my first coaches with lifting, hey,
Hmm.
so I think he was squatting something over 500 at the time, and I
Right.
was closing in on mid threes. I think this was maybe the same year that I hit a
Hmm.
national record on the squat.
Hmm.
And I asked him like, "Hey man, I'm looking at doing this record. I think it was 360 something
Hmm.
pounds as a teenager. Does it ever start to feel like lighter or heavier or any of this?
Right.
Because like
Right.
you're walking out, let's say 550 pounds
Hmm.
for your next PR. I'm going to be walking out almost 200 pounds less than that. Does 550 feel heavier?" And he just
Hmm.
says it always just feels like the most. It never really feels any easier. And there's this autopilot thing that happens where you shift from thinking about like a number
Hmm.
to it's just going to be really hard. Like I just know the feeling of walking something out that's going to be really tough,
Right.
and knowing, okay, what do I have to do
Hmm.
functionally on survival or autopilot
Hmm.
to get through this to make it happen. And I've found that a lot with like a lot of projects with business where you get this big thing
Hmm.
that you have somebody quits on you, you got to double down on how much work you're doing.
Hmm.
You hire a new thing, you start a new project, any of that stuff where you're just
Yep.
like all of my habits and things that I do automatically with anything that I'm doing, just
Hmm.
I'm going to rely on my kind of baseline habits, and everything past that kind of goes out the window. So you got to work really hard to build your foundation and what is your kind of automatic default mode, if you will.
But go back to that coach that it just feels hard. It doesn't,
Always going to
your
feel hard.
muscle memory attacks or attaches to certain aspects, but it doesn't attach to 300 felt like this and 350 felt like that. Okay, great. I love the business connection too, because what I was going to ask you, you've already answered, which is great, which is, are these skills transferable in terms of your everyday life? And the answer obviously is yes, since you know that answer. Um, so you go through something, and in terms of a physical challenge, walk us through that, man.
What do you mean exactly?
Well, Mimi, sorry. You're you're building, ascending. You're hitting really high levels of weight in
Mhm.
terms of accomplishments. And so it's two things. Number one, when you started to hit the records, what did that feel like? Not the records, the high levels. And then the descent in terms of the autoimmune disease,
Sure.
where all of a sudden you
So,
can't keep ascending.
I mean, the building was kind of it was cool in the sense that it felt the how to put this like the lead time on going into a competition and having
Mhm.
a successful meet
Yeah.
is very long, frankly.
Hmm.
At best, you're probably looking at 3 to 4 months where you're going to lay out a roadmap and
Right.
set out, okay, this date I need to do this, here's
Hmm.
what I'm going to work on month two, and so on.
Hmm.
And then you get this basically measuring post you go up against
Hmm.
when you do the competition, and then you look back on it and do like a post-mortem on the whole thing, find, okay, what worked, what didn't work, what do I want to
Right.
repeat, standard stuff, right? And then within there, you'll always get hit with some curveballs. I think
Hmm.
maybe every other meet, you'll ended up with, something would happen. You get a little injury. Sometimes it's a tweak. You
Hmm.
take a week off, you're fine. Sometimes it's a little longer. And so I kind of knew how to deal with some of these injuries. It's part of the process when you're trying to push, higher and higher instead of just
Hmm.
maintaining. There's going to be a lot of turbulence that you'll encounter. And so being able to roll with that's really important.
So, Matt, one of the things that feels so interesting to me is the element of going from someone who was not naturally picked in sports, and trust me, I know that feeling, to someone who is now being watched in a competitive setting and watched in a way where people are watching in admiration. What was that like for you, that change?
There was a couple, I think there's a couple ways to break it down.
Mhm.
So I think just the outright intensity of lifting, especially with a one rep max, the most you can do for one, and you're fighting to even get one.
Mhm.
For me, I never really had to deal with the feeling of a lot of people watching me because I don't know if visually any of it registered. Like I'm so locked into the zone that I know that feeling of, okay, the weight's on my back or
Mhm.
the weight's in my hands.
Mhm.
What do I have to do for my technique to succeed? And I can probably kind of hear the commands. They're telling me when to start or when to put it back in the rack. And that's it. So it was almost a blessing in that sense where the intensity is so high that I have no idea how many people are in the room.
Mhm.
Um, the other part that was so interesting to me really right from the jump with powerlifting is that there's this sense of community that I'd never really felt before. And with team sports, you see it a lot where, everybody on the same team will go out drinking after or whatever they do, right?
Mhm.
I always felt very much on the outside of that. I mean, it's not like you're going drinking at 7 years old, but you'd be invited to birthday parties or whatever, right? And
Right.
I just never really got that sort of feeling from it. But I
Mhm.
think because with powerlifting, it mimics so much what a lot of people just do in the gym for their workouts anyways,
Mhm.
that you get a lot of people who show up who maybe feel the same way. And they found this thing that, like myself, or hey, it's actually really enjoyable to
Mhm.
go and lift and find suddenly all these really like-minded people who want to do the same thing as me. And I've had situations where we'll be kind of at the end of a competition day, we're battling it out on the last deadlifts, so the last lifts of the day, and I'll be neck and neck with a guy, and we'd be battling it out on a total to see who would win.
Mhm.
And I'm just as invested in seeing this guy pull his third deadlift and making it, which would beat me,
Mhm.
as I would be wanting to pull my third deadlift, which would beat him. And just that feeling of you're there and you can only control what you can do. I can't control what he does. Almost fully removes it. There's no block, there's no defense. That doesn't exist. I was strong enough or I wasn't. And it's very matter of fact. And I think that lends itself a lot to the community side of things where there is no rivalry because you either did more or you did less, but ultimately you're all there for the same purpose to find, who's the strongest and how much you can evolve.
That to me must be such a different sense of community in that regard. And I'm always happy when somebody is able to find their niche. That just makes me happy. So I see that you went through a physical challenge, and which then didn't necessarily stop the ascent, but it certainly roadblocked it with the autoimmune disease. Would you care to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So the strongest that I've ever been to, at least until now, was 2018 or so. So for reference, I won Worlds in 2014 with a 500 kilo total. So
Yeah.
the sum of my heaviest squat, bench, and deadlift.
Hmm.
Um, the sport has gotten very, very competitive in the last 11 years, I guess, in that even in 2018, I totaled 600 kilos, so 20% more. And that was enough for me at a provincial level to take second
Where was that held?
in BC, so British Columbia, West
So you're
Coast.
traveling at this point. I mean, you're traveling for the sport and winning. So it's you're coming in second. That's amazing, man.
Yeah, so that was basically the strongest I'd been. It was one of the best competition cycles of my life, really. And shortly after that, maybe about 6, 8 months after,
Hmm.
um, I started getting a lot of just inflammation. Generally, it was very strange in that I'd had injuries before. I'd hurt my back before, sometimes from lifting, sometimes from just life. It
Living.
wasn't a bad deadly. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And I knew the rehab process. I knew the feeling, ow, that hurts.
Mhm.
What can I do? Maybe not sit as much, whatever. And knew the physio, booked the appointment, started going and treating it basically like an injury. I didn't really know what had caused it. Wasn't too worried about getting to the bottom of it. I just knew, okay, well, let's work on this, and worked on that for a few months, and
Mhm.
it sort of went away, and then it sort of came back, and around it just never really fully got better in
Mm.
that I could squat a bit, I could deadlift a bit, but never really anything very consistently.
Right.
But there's no rhyme or reason. I had days where I could go really heavy and have no problems. I had days where I would go really
Oh.
light and I'd be, unable to walk the next day or
Hmm.
have a real hard time. And there was this one day that really stands out to me where I was just tossing and turning in my sleep, like this would have been late 2019,
Hmm.
something like that. And then, okay, fine, bad night's sleep, life goes on.
Yeah.
And my alarm goes off in the morning, and then I turn to try to get out of bed, and it hurts so much that I can't move my legs to actually get out of bed.
Wow.
And it's 6 in the morning or whatever it is. And I'm like, I've hurt my back pretty bad. This is
Hmm.
worse.
Hmm.
What the heck? And I haven't lifted really heavy in a few days. I think I was actually even on like a deload, so a very light week.
Okay.
And so we're like, and go to the hospital. They
Hmm.
do x-rays and all this. And they basically give me, you're fine. Don't worry about it,
Mm.
which, was great. That's just what I wanted to hear. In some ways, I'm like, okay, cool. It didn't mess anything up. And others, I'm like, that's a total non-answer. It really doesn't feel great
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
Um, so I take some Advil and,
Hmm.
you know,
Sure.
goes away, fades,
Everything's
takes
fine.
takes a couple days,
Mhm.
fine. And then I over the next year and a half, I start
Mhm.
noticing it really happen more frequently, where it's maybe not necessarily to that same severity where I can't get out of bed, but it's taking me 20 minutes to get out of bed in the morning and not really correlating. And it's just this intensification of what I had felt in the previous couple of
Mhm.
years. And so through this time, I'm still working with, physio. I had done massage, I had done chiropractic, I had
Mhm.
done acupuncture, tried meditation, everything, right? I had taken continuing education courses on, maybe some less mainstream things just to learn about some different ways of looking at it to see is there something else I'm looking that I'd be missing that I wouldn't be able to get from a physio, but I could learn myself. No real solutions and it got to the point where it had gotten worse and worse and worse, where I was taking six double strength Tylenols a day on top of I think you can mix it with Advil. So I think it was 3 or 4 Advils, but basically I'd max the dosage on Tylenol and Advil for the day before getting into like liver problems.
And
And
it's
this
not
was
working.
I could get to maybe lunch and then have to
Wow.
like
Wow.
defocus a bit.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was just not a great time. And so kept going through. And
Hmm.
the unfortunate part with a lot of autoimmune conditions is it's generally diagnosed through a process of exclusion. So you have to fail out of everything.
I was going to ask you
And
about
then they'll say, okay, well, it's not this, it's not this, it's
that.
not this, it's not
Yeah.
this. You're stretching, you're active, your diet is good. It's not, Crohn's or whatever.
Yep.
um, let's do some blood tests. And I got in touch with, or had the last person I saw before I got in touch with my rheumatologist was a sports med doctor. And they
Okay.
said, yeah, okay, cool. It's not this, not this, not this, that whole process of
Yeah.
elimination. You need to go see this rheumatologist. They're going to get you in for a blood test and test for a couple things. They'll be able to tell pretty darn quickly at this point, based on this 3-4 years of information that we've got here, what it is.
Mhm.
And got the blood test very quickly, as they were like, yep, it's this. Here's what you got to do. Step one is, take Advil and Tylenol for a few months and see if it gets better. It's like one step ahead of you, bud.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm a pro at this.
Can we go step two? And step two is, getting onto some like prescription medications to basically bring the inflammation down. And it's a bit of a trial and error process,
Right.
unfortunately, with that.
Oh.
And so tried the first one, didn't really work.
Hmm.
Luckily on the second one, it did. And it blew me away because in the same way as I guess you can adapt to a lot of situations. If you're used to working 80-hour weeks, it feels somewhat normal to you. But the moment that you start working a job that's a 40-hour week, you feel like you're on vacation.
Right.
Right. And I didn't realize just how much that inflammation I had acclimated to, where brain fog was apparently a normal thing to me at this point, where
Right.
I'm sleeping 2 or 3 hours a night because I just can't lay still.
Hmm.
On top of that, the inflammation and just like all the pain response from everything, you're just so slowed down all the time. And I'm still working out. I'm trying to eat healthy. I'm stretching. I'm doing all these things, but just doing all those things and then finally having that one last thing that just pushes it over the edge. And it's like, all right, cool. Now things are a little bit more managed. Everything's a little bit more balanced. And I'm like, oh, I can sleep through the night. Cool. Oh, my brain works past lunch. Cool. I can tolerate a training session. If I want to go lift, I can't
Hmm.
necessarily do everything from a movement standpoint,
Okay.
but I can have go work out for an hour and a
Hmm.
half and be okay and be fine the next day too.
Mm.
And suddenly just started to feel a lot more like my old self, where, by the time I think the second prescription, the one that worked, had started to really take hold, that would have been start of 2024.
So
Sounds
we're
right.
looking
Yeah.
at close to 2 years,
Yeah.
18 months, 2 years.
Yeah, something like that. So about start of 2024, everything started to really normalize and feel
Hmm.
like I knew the landscape a little more again, if you will. Or, if I do a stretch for my hips, it actually loosens up my hips. It may start to make sense a little bit to
Right.
me. And so it's like, all right,
Hmm.
awesome. Like I can start to train again. I have no idea if I'm going to be able to compete
Hmm.
in powerlifting again. And I think that was the hardest part. Is I basically went from being at my highest high
Right.
2018, still getting stronger, still having great prep
Hmm.
cycles, to, hey, it doesn't really matter how hard you want to try. It's not even an option right now
Hmm.
because you're probably not even going to be able to get out of bed tomorrow to go to the gym.
So physically, that was beautiful the way that you walked us through. Mentally, uh, there's two things I'm curious about in that regard too. That as you go through the journey and as you describe that this is a process of elimination, which I would think would be maddening to go through, uh, the myriad of things it's not. And so, how were you able to maintain the sense of like, I don't know if it's balance, but more the sense of not being out of your mind where you're thinking, I'm never going to come to this conclusion. So that's the first question. How were you able to keep yourself sane? I guess would be the first thing.
Oh,
Mhm.
um, I wouldn't say I stayed sane the whole time,
Okay.
to be honest with you here.
Right.
The biggest thing that was challenging for me, especially
Mhm.
maybe really until last year when I
Right.
started to have some inklings of hope of training again,
Mhm. Mhm.
is I had basically wrapped my whole life around powerlifting. It was the first thing that gave me an identity. It was the thing that I did.
Mhm. Hmm.
It was the first thing I had really done that I felt competent and good at, and actually had some measurable success at it.
Right.
And then I also turned that into my business. So like in
Hmm.
many avenues of my life, this was who I was. And the first thought is, okay, well, if I can't powerlift, then I'm basically, maybe not the kindest words to talk to
Mm.
yourself with, but if I'm just washed up,
Hmm.
how can I expect somebody to see me as somebody who can help them?
Hmm.
And then it felt very powerless in that sense of, showing, well, this, it almost, the inner dialogue was very much that this had been taken away from me.
Mm.
And
Mm.
for me, I spent a lot of time thinking about it because you got a lot of time when you're
Yeah,
not
right. Exactly. You're not
actively,
sleeping. You're
right?
not doing anything, right?
Exactly. You
Yeah.
got wake up at 3 a.m. and you would take
Mm.
a 2 hour shower. It just
Mm.
doesn't matter at
Hmm.
that point, right?
Hmm.
And I thought about it a lot in that, okay, well, what is it about lifting that really drew me in the first place?
Hmm.
Was it competing? And maybe not. But a lot of what drew me in with lifting was the feeling of progression. And it was challenging because there was the way that I had measured that progression previously was through my squat, my bench, my deadlift, and my abilities as a competitor.
Right.
And as a coach,
Hmm.
it's a little bit different. And so over this period, as I'm going through my own things where, hey, maybe I can't compete
Hmm.
myself, I can still definitely do the things that got me interested in this in the first place, which is
Mm.
progression. And
Mm.
what got me into coaching specifically is
Hmm.
helping other people find that.
Hmm.
And so I basically just leaned into that even harder. And I remember coaching. So I've coached at a lot of meets. I handle a lot of lifters locally and also mostly all over North America. Um, I might not be there in person with, somebody's in Missouri or something,
Hmm.
but I remember walking to the first local meet that I was coaching at. It would have been early 2021 when we started having like in-person stuff again.
I was gonna say maybe even
Yeah.
longer than that, but I'll
We
let's
kind of
go.
went in and out of restrictions and
That's
stuff.
it.
But
Yeah.
anyways, the just being a basket case. So I'm there to handle one of the lifters I'm working with. So guide them through competition day, help them
Hmm.
have a smooth thing. And I'm sitting in my car before going into the venue, just a basket case.
Okay.
Like they're gonna know, that
Hmm.
I'm not lifting and this and that. I'm just all wrapped up in my own head about like, well, I'm an imposter and the whole
Oh.
imposter syndrome that comes with this. And like sitting there, I'm like, I've been lifting for over a decade at this point. I've
Hmm.
been coaching for 7 years, I guess it would have been at that point. I've helped this person get to this point. Like, shut up, Matt. Go help this person. And like today is not about you, okay? Just
Hmm.
go be a coach, okay?
Hmm.
You're not there to compete. Just show up and help the lifter. And they had a great day. But I had, my own little mental dialogue walking into that venue. I was like, reframe the day. Reframe the day. It's about them. It's not about you. And that to me felt like a really big turning point where I could really lean into my ability to
Hmm.
help others
Mm.
further themselves,
Hmm.
especially from a coaching standpoint, and showing them, okay, well, how can you get over these obstacles that you're facing?
Hmm.
How can you find that next level
Hmm.
that's drawn you into the sport? And it was a really interesting reframe in that, you know what, you can only control what you can control. I could not control
Hmm.
how fast the drugs work, how quick the Canadian medical system may or may not work,
Hmm.
all of these things,
Hmm.
right? And all right, well, what can I control? I can control how I help people. I can control my mindset
Hmm.
on that I bring into these relationships and situations and day to day. I don't have to be unrealistic, like, hey, this sucks. I can't lift right now. I don't have to be happy about that. But I'm I've kind of done what I need to keep
Hmm.
that ball moving for myself. Let's
Hmm.
go focus on the immediate in helping others right now and keep leaning into that more and more and sort of having my, live vicariously through your athletes, so to speak, is overused as that might be.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Does
So
that answer your
thank you. It's
question? I feel like I went
breakthrough.
like off the rails somewhere there.
No, no, I don't think so. And here's all I was going to add was I like when I hear the process. I'm weird with process, and that bill. When you realize when the process of elimination kind of ended, and it was like, and after the second pass, it was like, nope, that's it. And then you're getting your health back, and you were feeling a measurable difference. Is that something where, as you now get to manifest? different things. Is it something, this sounds weird, but I'll risk it, which is sometimes people get thrilled with a second chance and a new opportunity and a new lease on life, and other people get angry because they got cut off and they lost the time. What were you like when you realized, all right, I can do something with this physically, not just in the mental side, but in the physical? I could do something with this. How did it feel?
Once bitten, twice shy.
There you go. There you go.
I yeah, once bitten, twice shy. Yeah, so I basically started feeling better, and
Mhm.
I don't think I changed anything for a couple of months with my training. I was just like, I'm just gonna ride this out a bit and see how it goes, make sure it's
Mhm.
not a false start,
Right.
and very cautious and
Mhm.
um suspending my optimism maybe is a better way to
Mhm.
put it. I was like, let's just ride this out a little. I don't want to get too
I
excited and
like
go get
that.
let down again.
I like that answer. Just suspending optimism. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And so from there, I've, as a training philosophy, just with
Right.
sport in general, I like to make some small course corrections. I don't like to flip everything upside down and start anew, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was very much what I did there. I said, okay, well, I've already kind of been doing these things. I had really like my sweet spot when I was dealing with a lot of the health stuff was I could lift like for an hour twice a week.
Mm-hmm.
And training for competition, I was typically like 6 to 8 hours a week total. So
Got it.
maybe four days, hour and a half to 2 hours a piece.
Mm-hmm.
So quite a significant increase in workload. And I think all I really did was just added an extra 30 minutes a week to start of just, hey,
Wow.
let's try
Okay.
like just a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more stuff and let's see how that goes. Especially with having had so many setbacks before from trying to just be when I was healthy, I could, 18, 20, 22, I could be
Mm-hmm.
pretty aggressive with some of the swings and the cost of a
Mm-hmm.
setback was low, where, okay, I'm out for a week, I'm out for a couple of days, not a big deal.
Right.
But the cost of a setback at this stage would be a month or more,
Oh, okay.
right? And so I'm thinking, okay, let's just make these little incremental changes and it'll probably take me a bit longer than taking a big swing,
Mm-hmm.
but with markedly less like risk, I
Mm-hmm.
suppose.
Yeah.
And so I just made these little incremental changes. I went
Mm-hmm.
from, 2 to 2.5 days a week, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then it ended up adding a third day as a full session. And my sweet spot that I've kind of settled on right now is about, it works out to about 4 hours a week across 3 days. And
Okay. Got
the two
it.
things it lets me do, like I'm almost 10 years older now
Mm-hmm.
than, I mean, seven, right? But
Right.
I'm 30 this year.
Mm.
Right? Totally different
Congratulations,
landscape.
man.
Yeah, hey, I
Right.
haven't made it there yet, but um, it's totally different landscape. I recover
Mm-hmm.
differently. Even if I had not gone through all this health stuff, I'd imagine if I'd fast forward to 10 years, I've coached some people for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
10 years ago versus now, their training is radically different. I'm not expecting to be training exactly the same way either. Can I still progress? Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm looking at getting back on the platform later this year as long as everything stays good, but it's not going to be where I take my old routine and just try to run it again
Mm-hmm.
because that's unrealistic. I wouldn't take somebody else's routine and try to run it myself.
Right.
But I know the principles that made it work. And so I can apply those into my own lifting now with where I'm at with my life and my business and all my commitments outside the gym where, it fits not just at a physical level where I can recover and not worry about overdoing it,
Mm-hmm.
but mentally it allows me to have the space where I know that, hey, 4 hours a week, somewhere in
Mm-hmm.
there, I can basically fit that in where it feels productive. I can build towards this goal that feels separate from everything else. That's sort of like my little side project
Mm-hmm.
with competing. But then I have the bandwidth to show up and like I manage a team of 5 other people now.
Mm-hmm.
I can show up for them and do what I need to there. I can show up with the athletes that I coach and be the best coach that I need to be as well.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas 10 years ago, I had one guy that worked for me. I coached probably twice as many people,
Mm-hmm.
but there was like almost no real responsibilities outside of that. And so I could just go train, finish training, take like 2 hours to sleep and let my brain reset. And, that's just not realistic at this point. I train after work for an hour and a half between, finishing work and dinner.
And you make it work. So,
Exactly.
and you make it work. What's it like as you're navigating this different mindset in your coaching profession? You've talked about the difference in your actual lifting, and goals and aspirations. How do you think what would clients say, do you think, in terms of the way that you've changed in regards to your coaching? You describe the techniques, but what about what you're just actually bringing to the table? Mindset, disposition, and all that sort of thing. Knowing what you know now, how have you changed?
Like just in terms of my coaching philosophies and
Yeah,
coaching process.
exactly. Yes.
So I think I used to, this is a little weird. I see my hunch, if you had asked me 15 years ago, hey, coaching, if you're going to start in 5 years, where are you going to be in 15?
Yeah.
My initial gut reaction would probably have been um, that I would start very ambitious and like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get it done, and
Yep.
progress towards a more for lack of a better word, like coddling type approach of like, okay,
Sure.
well, let's find like, okay, how little can you do in this and that to fit it in.
Mhm.
And now I approach it not necessarily in the inverse sense, but the way that I coach, like, hey, nobody's going to be there to do it except for you. Like, I can't go lift this weight for you. I
Mhm.
can't make you show up to the gym. If you want to accept that you're going to be tired and that's good enough for you to not go do what you need to do to fulfill this project that you're trying to do right
Mhm.
now, that's fine. I'm just probably not who's going to coach you.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right. And on the other side of things, like I coach some guys, I work with this one guy and he works about 50 hours a week doing like food transport.
Okay.
And then he also decided somewhere in there to start his own business, but he never hired any staff in the first, startup business, right?
Oh my
So
God, yeah.
add another 30 to 50 hours a week on that. Plus he's got two kids. And I'm there for him, right? In the sense that, hey, we know what has to get done every week. We know how it fits. It's up to you to go and do it. I'm there to design a process that is going to work for you. And so
Mhm.
he's working 80, 90, 100-hour weeks plus kids. He's showing up like, hey, I want to, lift like I'm 20 and this and that. Cause, there's a certain mindset that comes with the ambitious nature of trying to push your boundaries as you go into your 30s and close in on your 40s. And that's all well and good, but
With kids. You already said
exactly.
it twice. So I was
Yeah.
gonna say
And if you feel like that's great, this is what I want to do, it's just not realistic. I'm here to show you, hey, this is what you should actually be doing. And for him, it was less.
Mhm.
I said, let's go lift 3 days a week. And, I think we gave it 2 weeks. I'm like, just humor me. Go lift 3 days a week.
Mhm.
And if it's worse, we'll change it. And we went and lifted 3 days a week. And his miraculously, a couple of his lifts that had been stalled for a year, year and a half,
Mhm.
started progressing again. He started
Wow.
noticing I'm not dragging my ass to the gym
Yep.
anymore because he's a real stubborn guy. And I mean
Mhm.
that, endearingly. But he's like, I'm just showing up. I'm like really excited to lift again. I feel like I have enough time to just mentally reset with everything else going on.
Mhm.
And so for me, it's not always saying, hey, go get yourself to the gym. Sometimes it's like, hey, approach your recovery just as diligently as you're
Aggressively.
approaching
Yeah.
your pursuits in, the yin and the yang, so to
Yep.
speak.
So what would be the age range of the people that you're coaching right now? Where's your sweet spot in terms
Yeah.
of
So
like?
Yeah, so mid 20s to late 30s. So typically about
Mhm.
24,
Mhm.
25
Mhm.
until just shy of 40 is most of the people we work with.
Mhm.
There's always going to be outliers, but that's the 80% bulk of
Great.
of who we work with.
So, what would you say right now in terms of somebody who either, like, as somebody who is definitely outside of that age range, you know what I mean? That it's like that they talk about functional fitness, or when I talk to integrative medicine people and what have you, that it's about functional health. And I would say if you are outside those outliers that you just referred to, right? What would be ways to get yourself started in addition to just saying call you, to just so they maybe get out of the sense of like when you talked about earlier, that sense of feeling like out of place, like that non-athlete, so to speak, right? And you walk into a gym and you don't know what the hell's going on, and there's 5 million machines, we'll say, and you don't have form or technique and all that sort of thing, what would you say would be the best way uh, to get yourself rolling? so you don't get intimidated and not show up the second time?
I've got, I think, two different ways I'd want to approach it. I think they're
Yeah.
both important for different reasons.
Hmm.
So the first is more just from a consistency standpoint. If you're busy or you're outside of that age range, odds are you've got a lot of other responsibilities that
Hmm.
probably make their way into your calendar, like your kids' soccer or date
Right.
night with your
Hmm.
partner,
Hmm. Yeah.
meetings at work, all those things. And
Hmm.
then there's this disconnect that happens where people seem to think that, oh, I'm just going to remember to work out. Bullshit. It doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. Um, Especially if you have a lot of responsibilities and time is a limited commodity.
Right.
Just put it in your calendar. Your worst case is you take that 30, 45, 60-minute slot that you've set for
Hmm.
your workout, and if something comes up, you just move it into another slot.
Hmm.
But I tell people this all the time. I'm very blunt with it. Don't argue with me. Put it in, and your worst case is you do the thing you said you were going to do, and it's redundant. And your best case is you remember that this is the time and you see just how precious that 60 minutes is, and you
Hmm.
show up and work out even if you're kind of mentally frazzled or you're having a bad day.
Hmm.
That's one.
Great.
Um, the second is I think finding the right gym space. And I don't know if a commercial gym is the best place for everyone.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I personally, I don't like commercial gyms for a lot of people. And even if you're not necessarily powerlifting, keep in mind, I'm very biased on this side of things.
Sure.
Some of the best progress I've ever made in my life
Hmm.
was switching over from a commercial gym, like a Globo gym, Gold's Gym, that kind of
I got
stuff,
you. Right.
to a basically a strength specific gym. And yes, you know what? There's the equipment and there's the maybe hardcore nature of the gym and all those kinds of things.
Hmm.
But what that type of gym encompasses is very different. The community is much smaller, the sense of anonymity is much lower.
Hmm.
And I can very clearly think of a few examples of people where they definitely walked in mostly out of ignorance, never having
Yeah.
worked out. They're like, oh, this gym is close to my house.
Hmm.
And you walk in, the walls are painted black, there's chains and stuff by the plates. Like it looks
Right.
crazy. And they're
Right.
like, oh crap.
Hmm.
And then they get talking with some of the people, and very quickly they're drawn into that community. It's less
Mm.
people and it's a
Mm.
little bit less of that
Mm.
bystander effect of a
Right.
community, if you will, where there's so many people at a commercial gym
Hmm.
that nobody's going to talk to, which
Mm.
is fine. But then there's the internal monologue that happens from no conversations happening, where you get in your own head and this person's going to care and this and that, and Karen
Hmm.
over there is going to say X.
Hmm.
Whereas you go to like a strength specific or a smaller,
Mm.
type of gym where there's a
Hmm.
community and maybe a purpose behind why people are there other than like looking good naked, which is
Yeah.
fine, but it's probably not the purpose for this gym.
Hmm.
Somebody's going to talk to you. Somebody will say hi. And even if you're
Hmm.
socially awkward like me, they'll
Me too.
probably just say, yeah, it's like, hey, blah, 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 do you want a spot?
Hmm.
Or, hey, I saw you doing this thing. Like, do you mind if I give you a tip on that exercise just so it doesn't hurt so much next time you do it? Oh, yeah, sure. Cool. And just, you don't have to be a socialite to do it.
Hmm.
You can walk in and not talk to anybody. But the sense of community, without you being the best, without you being the worst, without anything, it
Hmm.
will pull you in a little bit more. And in the same way as working out with my dad kept me accountable the first
Hmm.
few times I worked out,
Hmm.
having that sense of community where, hey, odds are somebody's going to probably, it'll come up in conversation. If you don't show up again, somebody's going to, hey, what happened to John? I didn't see
Hmm.
that guy last week. He seemed to come
Hmm.
in for like a week. But you can build those relationships and then meet some probably pretty cool people, even if it's only one or two people. Like the best man at my wedding is somebody I met at a powerlifting competition.
Wow.
Yeah. So those would be the two pieces of advice. Schedule it
Yeah.
in, like get over yourself, put it in your calendar,
Hmm.
and maybe at least take a look at some of the smaller gyms, perhaps more powerlifting
Hmm.
focused, even if your goal isn't that.
There's a place in Philadelphia that I now feel very compelled, based on literally on what you just said. So I know someone, he used to work at a large gym in Philadelphia, right? He's great. And he started a much smaller version of a strength training not that far from me. Literally, probably about a mile and a half from my home. So not 50 miles or, you know what I mean, or a plane ride. And that community that you were describing, the smaller and the community and all that sort of stuff, and a different sort of accountability than your membership's almost up, and that was just really beautiful to hear. You know what I mean? And just a reminder that when you described it that way, in addition to the just stick it in your calendar, no excuses part, I think that's a really strong combination. How do you see yourself, in essence, with what you know now, progressing in regards to what are some of the things that you would like to accomplish? Your coaching business, your online platforms are strong. What is it that you would like to see, maybe nothing change, but evolve necessarily in regards to what you're doing and the way that you're doing it?
So in terms of, I mean, personally, it's very straightforward. If things keep going well for my own training, I
Right.
have my eyes on a bench record that I'd like to take, especially with
Mhm.
bench having been never really a good lift for me.
Wow. Okay.
I'm in a position right now where I can train it really hard. So I'm like, maybe the next couple of years, that would be kind of cool.
Hmm.
At the business level, and I suppose, impact on community, I would love to keep seeing the sport of powerlifting grow. It's really taken
Mm.
off in the last 10 years.
Hmm.
Yeah, you know what? Sure, there's a business impact for me, and that's fine. But more importantly, I see the community impact in just how, I guess, same word again, but like impactful that's been for so many different people with whatever their reasons are for getting into lifting
Hmm.
and it keeping them drawn in, because there's this
Hmm.
indescribable thing that happens when you have that date in the calendar, like I mentioned earlier, where you
Yep.
just sort of lock in a little bit more, even if
Mhm.
it's for no other reason, even if you're the only person competing. When you have that date, you just push a little harder. And it's been so cool to just see people, and I watch lifters I coach, or even at competitions,
Hmm.
just other lifters, they pull that personal record, and there's this unfiltered emotion that happens after, like, yeah, I did that. Nobody else did that for me. I did it.
Mm.
And you can't take it away from me. Like, this is
Hmm.
this is all me, quite literally.
Hmm.
And just being able to see that, like, every time I show up to local competitions to work with some lifters, like, I'm reminded why I keep doing it. And
Mm.
so even if it is selfishly just seeing the sport continue to grow, I love that, and I
Ah.
want to keep seeing it.
Mhm. It's amazing. I really acknowledge you because I think the sense of going through a long process of, you know, pain and confusion and all that stuff bundled together, and to be able to articulate so clearly how you're able to move past and help other people. I think the most powerful thing that you said was that sense of, well, I get still coach. And so I'm excited for you in the sense that you also get to participate, whether it's the bench getting on, like getting on the podium for bench that wasn't a particularly strong sport or category for you, and then the continuation of being able to help people. I know your Instagram program or profile is strong. Is that still the best way for my crowd to reach you?
Yeah, definitely. I'm the
Okay.
most active on Instagram. I post there most days of the week. I put up a lot of information on just like how to get into the sport if you're curious about
Hmm.
it,
Hmm.
and really how you can keep getting stronger if with less than 5 hours a week in the gym. And one other thing I've actually just recently come out with it, if
Right.
your listeners are interested in it,
Hmm.
is I've come up with basically a first powerlifting meet guide. And so what it does is it shows you, like, hey, what are the strength standards you should expect based on your body weight and
Okay.
your sex. And it just quantifies, like, hey, on average, how strong do you need to be competitive if you're looking at
Hmm.
that? And where do you even find competitions near you, even
Hmm.
if it was just to go watch
Ah,
and see what it's all about.
right.
So I can send you the link for that as
I
well.
would
That's
love
pretty
that.
easy.
And we'll have that posted in the bio of this episode as you're watching and or listening. Yeah, please, yeah, because I really think, again, that sort of encouragement or just the sense that it's doable at all is exciting. Matt Taylor, I'm honored and I acknowledge your presence and I love your story, man. Thanks so much for showing up for us today.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on, John.
1000%. Folks, you've just heard another episode of Your Message Received. Keep watching, liking, sharing, telling everybody that you know, and we'll keep driving content through your front door. John Duffin here, Duffin Media. Have a great rest of the day, and we will talk soon. Thanks so much. Bye.
And now, making its way across the finish line, Your Message Received has been a production of Duffin Media.